Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is John Holloway. I'm Executive Director of Seattle Chamber Music Society, and I have the great pleasure of, thank you. I have the great pleasure of being able to moderate this conversation today with Kian Ravaei, our commission composer. Kian, welcome.
Thanks, John.
This is part of a new commissioning project we have with Great Lakes Chamber Music Society and Chamber Music Northwest. Great Lakes is in Detroit, Chamber Music Northwest, of course, in Portland, where we are commissioning a composer, a young, up-and-coming superstar composer, each of the next 3 years. This is year one of those three, and if this is any foresight into the future, we've made an amazing decision, and you're in for a treat tonight to hear this wonderful work. I want to start just by tonight's program, Prokofiev, Brahms, Ravaei. Tell us how it feels.
Well, it's not bad company. You know, I was looking up how old Brahms was when he wrote the piece that's on this program. He was 20 years old. He was younger than I was. So in a way, I'm behind. But in all honesty, it's such an honor to be at such a history festival and to work with such incredible musicians who are really bringing my score off the page. Yeah,
24 years old, Iranian-American composer, way behind at 24. I mean, Astrid Schween is performing your piece tonight, but quite behind. Talk to us about, I mean, you're in school, you finished at UCLA, you're at Indiana now. Talk to us about just going from kind of composing for some of your classmates to composing for the best musicians in the world.
Wow, that's a great question. You really compose differently when you know that you're composing for musicians of this caliber, because you know that they're capable of making anything look effortless. So I would say that when I was composing for my classmates, I would tone it down a little to make it easy to rehearse, easy to put together for our composition concerts. But on this stage, anything is possible, so that's really exciting for me as a composer. There are no holds barred for me.
That's wonderful. Our pre-concert recitals like this, commissions like these are sponsored by generous individuals. By a show of hands, how many people are members of our commissioning club here today? Okay, wonderful, thank you so much. If we could give them a round of applause. Of course, there's Kian's piece tonight. Next week, Gabe Kahane is here. And you just mentioned to me earlier, you were with Gabe at a concert in Caroline Shaw's backyard a few days ago.
Yeah, that's right. I was just in Portland, and I heard Caroline Shaw was having a backyard concert, and I'm friends with Gabe's sister, actually. She's a choreographer, and we were in a music and dance collaboration class at UCLA. And I was like, Kahane, that sounds so familiar. Are you related to Gabe Kahane, Jeff Kahane? He's like, yeah, that's my brother and my dad.
No big deal, just my brother and my dad.
Just my bro.
Yeah. That's wonderful. And today's pre-concert talk, Kian's trip here, very generously sponsored by Craig and Nancy Shoemate. Craig and Nancy, thank you so much. So we're going to use the next 20 minutes or so, and I'll say with new music, we all know the more you kind of hear it before you come, the more you talk about it, the more you like it. You're going to like this either way, this piece. I was able to hear the open rehearsal yesterday, but we want to use the next 20 minutes just to give some insight into you as a composer, into the piece, so that everyone here, as you're listening to the performance, feels like it's a second time almost that you've heard it. So first, tell us how you got into music.
I started playing piano when I was 4 years old, and I hated it, but my mom forced me to continue. Is this anybody else's story? Did anybody else's parent force them to play an instrument? But I'm glad she did, because it flourished into a love for music, though at first not classical music. At first, I left piano and started to play guitar, and I joined a rock band. And that was my thing for a couple years in high school. And I played a little jazz, I got into electronic music, but it wasn't really until I was 17 or 18 that I became really invested in the repertoire of classical music. I'd heard it all my life, but I thought all the composers were dead, you know? So that I became interested in classical music, and over the last several years, I've developed a very deep love for the repertoire of that tradition.
And we were talking backstage right before this about your desire, maybe aspirations to get into some conducting later. And what instrument do you play? If you had to choose one that was your instrument, what would it be?
Uh, Probably piano. I compose at the piano. I could never give a recital or play chamber music or anything like that, but it's a good tool for plunking out melodies and things like that.
Wonderful. So Suvin Kim, the artistic director of Chamber Music Northwest, gives you a call at some point about a year ago and asks, would you participate in this commission for these 3 organizations? What happened from that moment to knowing that it's going to be a string quartet to thinking about Emily Dickinson's work? Can you just take us through that process a little bit?
Sure. Actually, it was Mari who gave me the call.
Mari is here, right? Where's Mari? Hi, Mari.
Hey,
Mari's
Mari.
Yeah.
And when he gave me that call, I was at Copeland House. It's Aaron Copland's historic landmark home in upstate New York, doing a short festival there. And at first I remember thinking, is this? Are you sure you got the right number? But he did, and I presented a few ideas to Suvin of what I wanted to write, and one of them was this idea of miniature tone poems for string quartet. Because the string quartet has a history of being structured in these expansive movements, like a big novel, I wanted to see what it would be like to create some short poems and have that structure the piece. So then I settled on Emily Dickinson because she's one of my favorite poets and she writes so beautifully about nature. I thought this piece could be a kind of nature cycle, exploring the gamut of nature and taking us on a journey through all of its wonders.
That's wonderful. And by a show of hands, who came to the open rehearsal yesterday? You had a little sneak peek. Okay, great. Lucky you. Talk to us about the piece, how it unfolds, the movements, maybe a little bit about the poems.
Sure. It's in 7 short movements. I think of them all as little tone poems. And they're all inspired by a poem by Emily Dickinson, each one a different poem. The first movement is called I'll Tell You How the Sun Rose. The last movement, If I Can Stop One Heart from Breaking. I don't know if anybody has heard of these poems. And the piece, when looked at as a whole, takes us on a journey from morning, it starts with the sunrise, to night. The moon was but a chin of gold, if anybody knows that poem. And then back to a new morning. And in the last movement, we kind of zoom out and we listen to the voice of nature. So that's the structure of the piece generally.
Wonderful. And you mentioned earlier there's some poems, obviously about nature, about animals. Would you be willing to just kind of walk us through a couple of the movements or maybe all the movements?
Yeah, sure. So the first movement, I'll Tell You How the Sun Rose. It starts with this melody. Each instrument coming in one at a time to represent the sunrise coming out over the horizon. I can think of another couple of pieces that start in a similar way. Some of you might recognize. That's Strauss, Thus Spake Zarathustra, which begins with the sunrise. And another piece which I love that isn't explicitly a sunrise, but kind of reminds me of one. It's Appalachian Spring by Aaron Copland. So I took those 2 pieces and I created my own kind of sunrise. The second movement, High Above the Earth, I heard a bird. I was searching for inspiration for bird sounds. And I was thinking about this song by Stephen Sondheim, Green Finch and Linnet Bird from Sweeney Todd. Has anybody watched this musical? It's one of my favorite songs. And it starts with this thing in the piano that goes like, which is like a little bird call. So I knew I wanted my movement to be a little faster than that, a little more aggressive. So I kind of took that and I turned it into. And that's how the movement begins. There's this other part later in the song. It's like a bird-like melody. And that also figures into the movement. The third movement, 2 butterflies went out at noon. This one was more inspired by the Emily Dickinson poem because the second line of that poem is, and waltzed above the farm. So I thought, why don't I write a little butterfly waltz? And you'll hear the strings doing a little tremolo. that sounds like a butterfly flapping its wings or something like that. The fourth movement, A Narrow Fellow in the Grass, it's about a snake. So it starts with these sinewy glissando gestures in the strings going up and down. And it turns into a kind of diabolical march with sudden sforzandos, like the snake is jumping out of the grass. I actually was bitten by a snake once when I was 7 or 8 years old. It wasn't poisonous, thankfully, but I can confirm this is what my experience was like, this movement. The fifth movement, The Moon Was But a Chin of Gold. I just tried to capture a serene night. There's this whole genre in classical music called the nocturne. Chopin wrote a lot of nocturnes, and so this is my own kind of nocturne in a way. It has a tinge of melancholy. And the sixth movement, A Spider Sewed at Night, uses a lot of ricochet. Ricochet is a violin technique. Well, all string instruments can do it, but Paganini made it famous. And it's when you throw your bow on the string, and it creates a sound that reminds me of, if you could take a sonic microscope and zoom in on the sound of a spider weaving a web, I think it would probably sound something like that. And so you hear that throughout the movement, and it's kind of reminds me of Halloween. I wrote creepy in the score, so see if that comes across. The seventh movement, If I Could Stop One Heart from Breaking, this is where we zoom out. It's the voice of nature. And in this movement, I have set the opening line of the poem to a little melody that sounds like, if I can stop one heart from breaking. And this melody is passed around throughout the ensemble. If you look at the score, actually, there's that melody in a little tiny music staff printed right above the first line of music, which is my nod to the last movement of Beethoven's Opus 135 quartet. This is the last quartet that Beethoven ever wrote. His late quartets mean a lot to me. Their influence shows up throughout this piece. And he writes in a little staff a melody, and under it, is it so, it is so. And that motif gets played with. So this is my nod to that in a way. And this melody, I can think of two melodies that also sound like it. So that's, anybody? Brahms' Lullaby. And if anybody knows this ballet by Stravinsky, Pulcinella, that's the opening of Pulcinella. So my melody is kind of a mix of both. So that's the overview of my piece. Oh, yeah.
Well, we were treated to the open rehearsal yesterday, and so I was able to hear some of that already. Of course, got the score 2 months ago or so. It was premiered in Detroit in June. What happened between that premiere and rehearsal yesterday?
Not a whole lot, but I did revise one movement. I'm constantly tinkering. This piece that I mentioned that Brahms wrote when he was 20, he also revised it 20 years later. So he was thinking about it, I guess, for those 20 years. And how can I make it better? And I'm doing the same in a way, on a much smaller time scale. And basically, the strings were playing harmonics, which is this technique that sounds very, very high. But I've changed these to stopped notes, so it's expressive playing, and it helps with the intonation, with the tuning. So it's kind of a technical thing, but it makes a big difference, I think. This is the fifth movement. The Moon Was But a Chin of Gold. This one is different from the version that we presented at the Great Lakes Chamber Music Festival.
And you chose such an accessible, easy genre. I mean, just the string quartet, right? Which, tell us other string quartets that have inspired you, and any of them direct influence here today that you can kind of point to with this piece?
Yeah, absolutely. The string quartet, frankly, is my favorite genre of classical music. The late Beethoven quartets, Mendelssohn II, Ravel, Debussy. One of my mentors, my composition mentors, Richard Danielpour, has 8 beautiful string quartets. And Opus 132, I think, of Beethoven stands out above all of them, especially this third movement, which is a very serene song of thanksgiving to a healing deity, basically. And I actually took the mood from that movement and tried to incorporate it into the last movement, as though, nature, as she sings, "If I can stop one heart from breaking," is singing it to humanity, is saying, "This is for you. My creation is for you." And this has also become a mantra for me as an artist as I've composed this piece. My music will never do it for everybody, but what matters is that it can stop one heart from breaking. And if that's true, then it will have been enough.
If only we had that to promote this concert. It would have sold out months ago already. Yeah, for sure. Wonderful. Iranian American from LA. Any influence from the Iranian side of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So for those who don't know, LA has the largest community of Iranians outside of Iran. My parents are Iranian immigrants, and I grew up around a lot of Iranian culture. There was a lot of Iranian music playing around the house, but it was mostly Iranian pop music. As I grew older, I started to write melodies that were naturally reminiscent of Iranian music, but I never really studied the repertoire. It was just coming out. So in the last couple of years, I've started actually getting into the weeds of the radif, or the repertoire of Iranian classical music. And people spend a lifetime learning this repertoire, but I'm just taking it one small corner at a time and trying to learn it as deeply as I can and slowly synthesize that with my Western classical music training to create a reflection of my identity, which is one part Iranian and one part American.
Wow. And you're joining us for the post-concert Q&A today, and I know that after the concert there's going to be a lot of questions from the audience, but I did want to just take this opportunity, if there are any questions that you feel like will help you and your peers sitting next to you understand and love this piece more, feel free to raise your hand. We'd be happy to call on you. Yeah, Diane.
I was very interested in the opening and the rehearsal that I attended, the collaboration between you and the musicians. I noticed that you would say a few things or comments, but they might come back and you say, okay, that's fine. So I really think it's wonderful to see that a living composer there to advise and yet also to get something from the artist performing your piece.
Thank you, absolutely. And you probably remember Tessa saying, "Oh, it's so nice to have a composer in the room who's not dead." Yes, that's very true. It's great for me as a composer because if someone screws up a Beethoven piece, he can't do anything about it. Not that they would screw anything up. They're such amazing musicians, and they, in fact, give me ideas that I couldn't have thought of myself because they have such an intimate relationship to their instrument.
It's a pretty remarkable group, too, the quartet playing tonight, this piece. Yes?
How did you get into composing from playing?
Can you repeat the question for me?
Yeah, so he asked, how did you get into composing from playing? It's a little embarrassing to admit, I started by producing electronic dance music. I had been practicing piano all my life, but it never really occurred to me to write a piano piece because I didn't resonate with that. When I was 11, I was into electronic dance music, and in a way I came full circle. So you can make it on your computer, and I thought, whoa, that's just like playing video games. And the rest is history.
We have other questions. Yes?
So we got a little bit at the end how you tweak the piece, but how do you start? How do you write such a big work? Like, so there are movements you checked out and we don't get to know about.
Yeah, there's significant parts of this piece that I cut because it's about a 20-minute piece, and I wrote more than 20 minutes. It's hard to tell from a piece of sheet music how long a piece is really going to be, but you have a general idea. I actually wrote the fifth movement first, which is funny that that's the one that ended up needing revising. But after that, it was like the third and then the last one. The first movement, which is the shortest, is the one that came last, actually. It's just a minute long, but I knew it had to set up the piece in a certain way. And for that reason, I had to know everything that came after it first.
We got time for another question or two if they're out there. Yes.
I'll ask the one that I'm not supposed to ask. And obviously, there's a lot of politics involved in music, and with Iran right now, especially with women being told they need to dress a certain way, and et cetera, et cetera. Do you plan on writing anything that could be construed as political, and do you think it would be recognized that way in the future?
You don't have to answer that if you want to.
No, I really appreciate that question. Did everybody hear that question? So she was asking my Iranian heritage, the political situation in Iran. There's a tyrannical regime that's, women have to wear headscarves, and there's a lot of political oppression that goes on. And yes, I have written music that responds to this, and I continue to do so. Most recently, I set this Iranian traditional song called Morgh Sahar, Bird of Dawn, for mezzo, soprano, and piano. And this is a song that has been used as a protest song in Iran. And I gave it a mournful twist and made it a tribute to the women life freedom movement that's happening in Iran in response to the killing of Mahsa Jina Amini. So I hope to continue to write works in this vein.
Yes.
So can you make a living as a composer, or do you end up needing to have a day job?
Yes. He can make a living as a composer. I think you're all going to hear that tonight, but Kian, please.
Wow, did my parents tell you to ask that? Almost every composer I know does something else in addition to composing, whether it's teaching, conducting, curating a festival like this one. And that excites me. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, to have a variety of activities, because it will all feed back into composing. If I'm just composing, then there's no life to create art from.
Because it's about having space for your creativity. I think that's where the question was.
Yes, absolutely.
It wasn't from your mouth.
Yes, was there a question here in the second row? No? Yeah.
I think you may know this, but I think it's interesting that the one you revised is, I believe, the one that had a lot of women, at least, in tears at the dress rehearsal.
Oh, really? I wasn't aware of that. Wow, thank you.
What was the comment?
The comment was the one that I revised, the fifth movement, she said was the one that had a lot of women in tears at the open rehearsal yesterday. It wasn't just the women, he says.
From an attendee, actually. You were there. Yeah, it's great. Well, yes, one more question here.
Could you just give us a little insight into the commission selection process? Like, did you have to apply? What made you choose Kian? I guess it's for both of you.
Sure, I can start. This particular partnership, and SCMS has a commissioning club that is becoming more and more active. So here's a plug. Participate. Join the commissioning club at SCMS. Help us find more great talent like Kian. This partnership was between Chamber Music Northwest and Great Lakes Chamber Music Society. Paul Watkins, who's on stage tonight, is the artistic director in Michigan. And Suvin Kim and Gloria Chen are in Portland, and of course James Ennis. And so, the four of them happen to be among the best musicians in the world. They meet, they have conversations, and they choose young composers. And I think actually Suvin is the one that was most familiar with your work and presented that to James. And a year later, Kian's sitting on the stage for this. So that's from our side. Do you have anything to add?
No, not much to add. I just got the phone call.
Yeah. Yes.
So I'm curious, how did you get your name out there in the world so that, I mean, you know, you're composing at the university. What is it that causes your music to become known, quote unquote, known?
That's a great question. I think, frankly, a lot of it is luck, is who is hearing your music. And in my case, I happen to have a handful of influential mentors who heard my music and championed it, and that has led to other opportunities. The classical music industry is very small. Everybody talks, everybody knows each other. So when somebody is excited about a composer, word spreads. Thank you.
And all of you tell your friends about his music too. Where can they hear more of your music after tonight?
You can search my name on YouTube. You can, on Google, go to my website. All my works are listed there. I'm on Instagram at Kian Ravaei.
Yeah, and I just want to close this conversation. First, we can't wait. It's wonderful. You'll see him again at the post-concert Q&A, so please do plan on sticking around for that, as well as Noah Geller and Astrid Schween. I want to thank Craig and Nancy Shoemate again for sponsoring today. I want to thank our commissioning club for making this possible. And I want to thank all of you for coming tonight to the pre-concert recital, to investing in young composers and new music, and going through this journey with us. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you all.